I can't imagine a time in modern American history more both fraught with danger and also informed by insane criminality. This is a period, Gil, that makes like the Nixon administration look like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I mean, really. I mean, it's a truly a scary thing when you have, in my judgment, the government of the United States walking in lockstep with the president without any guardrails at all. And then you have, as we've seen, the director of national intelligence in the form of Tulsi Gabbard essentially crafting a message to try to suggest that the prior administration, the Obama administration, prior to the first Trump presidency, was involved in some kind of election engineering. It was in a way, I guess he's playing the old hits, but in another way, it really whipped my head around to remind me of how dangerous things can really get.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood because Ellen Aberlin, who played Lady Aberlin on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, said just this morning that the news right now is like living in the National Enquirer, put in a container of pulled pork, sitting in the green room of the Jerry Springer show. And I think Ellen pretty much nailed it. Getting into Tulsi Gabbard, who as National Intelligence Director is a little like making Dostoevsky the head of humor. This stuff is going on all over. It's not just this, oh, Hillary Clinton was on drugs thing, or the claims about Obama committing treason and stuff, which even Ted Cruz has said, yeah, it's nonsense. That's not going anywhere. But the Pentagon, in reacting to news that from their reports about the Inspector General of the Pentagon looking into Pete Hegseth's giving out national intelligence information in a non-classified way, instead of just saying, well, it's not true, even though indications are it's true, but said this stuff is as old and as doddering as Joe Biden was. So they're doing all this stuff, trying to throw these sticky spiders against various Democrats so MAGA people don't look at where Trump is and where this administration is. And it's important to remember, because people speak of MAGA as this one thing that is supporting Donald Trump, and it does. But MAGA has a couple of contingencies. One of them is, I support Donald Trump no matter what. There's also a large, not a majority, but a very large percentage of MAGA, which came to this out of Q, which everybody is trying to forget. The fever dreams of this guy who was sitting in the Philippines making up stuff about children being raped in the non-existent basement of a completely innocent pizza parlor by Democrats. It's those former Q people that within MAGA that are causing huge problems for Trump, because they're completely sold on this thing of Democrats and their allies have been raping little children. And they've been constantly sold on this by Donald Trump and his allies. That Q faction, which is still pretty strong. Give you an example. There was just a poll found 87% of Republicans overall support Donald Trump, but only 35% believe him on Epstein, because they've been living the Epstein fever dream. And a lot of that comes from Q selling all of this. I know they're mostly forgotten now, but they're selling this for years as an important part of why, attacking Iran doesn't bother MAGA, even though Trump said no more wars, why all of these other things you think would upset MAGA don't. This issue does, because it's got a 3-4-year-old pre-sale.
That's so well described, because you're right. That part of MAGA that is committed to that conspiracy feels, hey, there are really kids who are threatened by, and then of course, as you say, the conspiracy goes even, it's more than pedophilia. It's like eating kids and all this other stuff. I mean, it got really crazy. But the idea that the Epstein Files contain a lot of information on Democrats who were behind this plot, That has been something that they've had a death grip on. And so now when you have their guy in who said, we're going to tell all and blow the whistle on all these Democrats, all of a sudden you have him saying, hey, there's nothing to see here. They know that they're being betrayed. And you even see it at the highest levels of the GOP. A House subcommittee now voting to subpoena Justice Department for Epstein Files is the latest headline. 3 Republicans on the panel voting with Democrats for that subpoena. That subpoena then for those files defies Trump and GOP leadership. You know, MAGA Mike actually adjourned Congress prior to even the chance to vote on seeing those Epstein files. Of course, that vote was demanded by the Democrats. So to subvert that vote, he adjourns Congress for the session, for the summer. So I love that you point to MAGA Nation, because they seem as though they would be angered by this, and they likely are angered by this. I wonder to what extent they will pick up and be reminded, Gil, that the real enemy is the Democrats, and let's pay attention to the stuff that Tulsi Gabbard is serving up for us now. In other words, can they be distracted by the new shiny object?
No. And let's be clear about something. The MAGA people who are upset about this are not going to be voting Democratic in the midterms. So what we're talking about at most for the Democrats is that some MAGA people get so disgusted by this, they don't vote, that it suppresses the Republican vote. That's the best Democrats are going to get out of this. Nobody who, was full MAGA, or especially, were Q supporters, are going to go, yeah, okay, maybe Hakeem Jeffries has a point. That's not a happening thing. Still, it's a danger for Trump if a Republican vote is suppressed in the midterms. Are any of these things, Hillary Clinton was on drugs? Well, who cares? She's never running for anything again. It's not going to carry anything. It doesn't mean anything. All of these things that they're trying are against Obama, same case. He's never running again. Doesn't make any difference. Are against his old enemies, the Pentagon, going on about Joe Biden yesterday. I mean, give me a break. Part of this is they don't know who in the Democratic Party to really focus on right now,
Sure.
because the Democratic Party is so askew. It's kind of like, well, who's the 2028 Democrat we need to focus on? They can't figure it out. Neither can the Democratic Party. That all said, some of this is just they're repeating these memes from Trump's old enemies list.
Exactly.
And he doesn't know enough about any new people to yell and scream it out, except maybe Mamdani, the possible new mayor of New York City, because he's from New York City and he has friends there who talk to him things, and he's a Muslim. So,
Yeah, right. There's a lot wrapped up into that one reference, exactly. But you wonder if MAGA even is aware of Mamdani in any kind of a high-profile way. As you say, they're tuned into different frequencies. You mentioned this a couple of times, and I want to play it because it is a Russian talking point. This is a piece of Russian intelligence that was regurgitated by Tulsi Gabbard yesterday. It was an extraordinary thing. This is the thing about Hillary being on, mood stabilizers or whatever that is. I could not believe it. Tulsi Gabbard saying this. Go ahead, Albert. Play a little bit of this for Gil.
Emotional problems, uncontrolled fits of anger, aggression, and cheerfulness, and that then Secretary Clinton was allegedly on a daily regimen of heavy tranquilizers. Then CIA Director Brennan and the intelligence community mischaracterized intelligence and relied on dubious substandard sources to create a contrived false narrative that Putin developed a quote-unquote clear preference for Trump. Brennan and the
stop
IC
right there.
misled
I really just wanted you to hear that
referencing
first
the
part,
debunked
because
Steele
that
dossier.
is Russian intelligence that Tulsi Gabbard was, as I say, offering. It's lifted right out of the Putin intelligence, and it was just articulated by the Director of National Intelligence for the United States of America. It's an extraordinary thing.
It is an extraordinary thing. And Donald Trump is enamored of other dictators, whether it be the leader of Hungary or the leader of Russia and Putin, or remember the bromance he had during his first term with the leader of North Korea. He loves these guys. He wants to pattern himself out after these guys. He also wants to think that he can eventually overpower them and become the king of these people. That hasn't worked out very well for him. He's, right now he's really upset with Putin because Putin proves to be a guy who just goes, yeah, I'm just using you. I'm not really going to pay any attention to anything you say in Ukraine or do anything because you said anything.
Play the rest or a little bit more, if you would, Albert, of Trump sort of celebrating Tulsi Gabbard. This is Trump speaking. And Trump was making the point that this should be the new narrative. He's celebrating Tulsi Gabbard in the room, clearly for, baking this new cake that we can serve to the media. And then he actually describes the way in which we will serve it to the media. Go ahead, Albert.
And Republicans are doing well. And I have the best numbers I've ever had. It's amazing. I watch people on television. Well, what about Donald Trump's polling numbers? Yeah, they're the best numbers I've ever had. But remember this, Obama cheated on the election. And we have it cold, hard, blue, and it's getting even more so because the stuff that's coming in is not even believable. So, and you should mention that every time they give you a question that's not appropriate. Just say, oh, by the way, Obama cheated on the election. You'll watch the camera turn off instantly. But I want to thank all of you again, once again. This is an incredible job. It's incredible people, really incredible people.
One thing, just stop for a second, Albert, then continue. Gil, it's funny to me that he talks about Obama fixing the election. That's the election he won.
Yes.
It's the most extraordinary fix that I've ever seen, given the fact that it didn't work.
Here's the wonderful Freudian moment in that, where Trump says, the stuff that's coming in, it's not even believable.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
did you catch that?
Right, exactly.
Just
Go ahead, Albert. Play
the rest. Something leaked out.
Play the rest for him, please.
Director of National Intelligence. Oh, where's Tulsi? She's like hotter than everybody. She's the hottest one in the room right now because she found out with certainty. I think we knew it before, in all fairness, Tulsi. But now you have certainty. She has all the documents. She has everything that you need. And she found out that Barack Hussein Obama led a group of people and they cheated in the elections and they cheated without question. It's not even would you say there's even a little question there, Tulsi? She says no. And you found things that nobody thought we'd ever find. And I'm very happy and very honored to have you with us. She's right now, by far, Speaker, she's hotter than you right now, Speaker. She's the hottest person in the room right now, Speaker. So Tulsi, great job, and I know you have.
Yeah, again, Tulsi, great job for serving up, as I say, what is the president wants, which is for everyone to pay attention to this and not the Epstein Files, which we'll get to in a second. But Gil, I wanted you now play a little bit, Albert, if you would. Clapper, who he's gone after, as you know, Gil, and he wants to go over Obama, Clapper, Comey, and again, I'll go ahead, just play a little bit for Gil, if you would.
And it's great to have you here, Director Clapper. I mean, it was a remarkable appearance by someone who now holds the job that you previously held. And she's basically accusing the president that you served under and the people you served with and you of fabricating an intelligence assessment to damage President Trump. What's your response to that?
Well, it's patently false and unfounded. I was present at the meeting that everybody talks about, and I heard directly what President Obama asked us to do, which was to compile all the reporting and summarize it that we had accumulated in the run-up to the election of 2016, put it in one document in various levels of classification, and including a public release. And he wanted that done before the end of his administration. It was not to concoct intelligence or make it up or anything of the sort, which is absurd.
So he told you to investigate, but you're saying he did not tell you what conclusion to reach.
He did not.
Because that's what they're essentially alleging here. She's saying the assessment used unclear, unknown sources, and that it was subject to unusual directives from President Obama, and also the allegation that it was a rushed assessment, essentially.
Well, yes, we had a short deadline to get it done because the president stipulated he wanted it completed before the end of his administration, in order to be able to hand off a compilation of what the Russians had attempted to do to influence the outcome of the election in 2016. He wanted to be able to hand it to the then President-elect Trump and to the Congress.
There seemed to be some conflating over whether Russia could actually change voting machines, whether they did do that, and
This
in
is the
terms
last
of
part I wanted you to
who
hear.
Russia wanted to win the election. One thing that was a huge point of focus for Director Gabbard was that they're pushing back on the notion that Russia wanted Trump to win, that they did this to help Trump. Was that intelligence, you believe, sound when that finding that Russia was doing this in the favor of Trump?
First, on the voting machines, it's quite correct. The Russians did not electronically penetrate any voting machine or anything connected with tallying votes. So they did not succeed, even if they attempted, which we don't think they did, to manipulate voting. What the Russians did do, in contrast to that, was mount a very sophisticated, extensive, and aggressive information operations campaign to influence public opinion in this country. And they used phony social media posts, phony social media accounts. RT, the Russian government-controlled media outlet, which has a bigger following in this country than this network does. They used fake news implants, was very sophisticated and very focused on what, and they wanted to first sow doubt, discord, and distrust among the American public. And I believe they succeeded. And unfortunately, we're a ripe target for exploiting our divisiveness and politicization. And they did favor the candidate Trump over candidate Clinton. Long-standing animus for the Clintons by Putin. And that carried over to the election. He held
Good. So
secretary.
that's what I really, that was a good lengthy chunk, but I wanted to really explore it with the former DNI, what he knows. And what he's saying is, yeah, Russia didn't flip any votes, but they essentially put on a full court press with disinformation.
They did. And in fact, it led to a dispute between me and somebody I did consider a friend, and then I can't really say a dispute since I don't know Tom Hartman, but Tom Hartman and Larry King, and Larry and I, we're friends. We're both on RT, and the idea was why RT wanted them was to draw otherwise liberal progressive people into watching RT and all of its 22 hours of other shows and propaganda. And I was really upset with both of them for doing that, just so they could go, I'm on television, not just radio, I'm on TV.
And it legitimized, you're saying, on some level, RT because of those personalities on it.
It legitimized it, but more than that, the shows served as a way to get people to watch Russian propaganda in all the other hours that they otherwise would not have watched, because they're filled with promos for the other shows. And if it happened to be on, here comes the next show. So that was especially unfortunate. And that went on for years, but that's what RT was about. As well as Sputnik, they had a whole organization that was doing radio shows. There were several radio stations in this country that basically released by Russian services and just put on Russian propaganda all day.
Gil, I have a confession.
But the
I'm from Washington.
Obviously, there.
I'm from Washington, D.C., and when I used to go back and see my parents regularly, I would listen to RT on the radio. It's called Radio Sputnik. And I got to tell you, man, a lot of the shows are really good. A lot of the information is really good. And to your point, it became difficult to parse, to separate the propaganda from the reality and from some of the minds and analysts who I kind of respect. So I think you make a really good point about RT. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like seeing, your favorite actor do a commercial for cigarettes, and you're going, no, come on.
Thank you.
I still love you as a person, but come on.
So, look, we're going to talk about the legal part of this. I mean, this is all just smoke. There is really nothing here but smoke on the part of this administration. But you can see how he's peacocking about it, and he's owning the news cycle with this Gabbard announcement. But the reality is that what he's distracting from is the Epstein Files and these new meetings that are going on right now, actually, with Ghislaine Maxwell and his former attorney, Trump's former attorney, Todd Blanche, who's number 2 at the Justice Department. Give me a moment about how you game out this Epstein thing.
It's complicated on many, many levels. For one, I think that Todd Blanche, of course, now with the Justice Department, number 2 person in the Justice Department, formerly a Trump defense attorney. So he's certainly not there to try and get Donald Trump. Also, I don't think that this is going to be the meeting that anything will come out of that's going to be public. I think this is the negotiation. This is the Ghislaine Maxwell saying, who's, serving 20 years, if I say this, what do I get? Do I get a full pardon? Do I get a commutation? What do I get out of this? And what do you want me to say in order to get that? So I think that's what the Blanche meeting is going to be about. Then that will lead to, if an agreement is made, to her appearance before hearings. And out of that, I think we'll find out, whatever. I want to be clear on this, not because I'm a fan of Trump hanging around with Epstein, any more than I'm a fan of Bill Clinton having hung around with Epstein, or Prince Andrew, or any of the other celebrities who hung around with him. We don't know that any of them had sex with minors. In fact, there is the one story told by somebody who was there when Trump expressed interest, at least ogling a young woman. Epstein said, "She's not for you." And there is some evidence that Epstein, even though he provided women for many people, which would still go to, the prostitution charges, that he wanted all the minors for himself. And that, you can have the 18-year-olds, the 15-year-olds are for me. So, we don't know that on the other side of this, we're going to get a smoking gun of Trump with a child. We do know from Trump's own mouth years ago, when he talked about Epstein he said, like myself, likes to surround himself with beautiful women, and then added, some of them quite young, that Trump probably knew what the hell was going on with Epstein, as maybe did some of these other well-known people of all political parties and backgrounds have known and have chosen, because of Epstein's ability to generate large amounts of wealth for your campaigns, to look the other way. So we don't know what we're getting out of this, other than Trump hung around Epstein a lot, as did Bill Gates and many other people. And from that statement, that Trump more than likely knew what Epstein was up to and decided to look the other way. Other than that, we don't know, except Trump is so, because he could just say that. It's pretty much what Alan Dershowitz, who was actually accused by one woman of having sex with her as a minor. Dershowitz has denied it, and so far, other than her statement, there's been no proof of anything. But still, there's this question of, did they know and turn the other cheek? I think that's very possibly the reason why Trump, instead of just going, as Dershowitz said, yeah, it's on the planes, I didn't do anything myself. I think that may be why he's going so nuts about this, because it's plain he's in the files. We've always known it. There's tons. He says, I barely knew the guy. There's former statements by him about how they're best friends. They knew each other. They were buddies for 15 years. There's no doubt. The pilot, Epstein's pilot, said, oh, yeah, Trump was on the plane lots of times. Trump has said, no, I've never been on the plane. It doesn't wash. So,
but to that point, Gil, he's taken kind of a hard line on that, and I think the fact that he's swimming away so vigorously, that's the thing that makes this even more radioactive. It's sort of what you said. I mean, he should have been counseled along the lines of what you were just saying, which is, hey, dude, you can say, yeah, Epstein was a friend of mine. I didn't know he was into all this stuff. I flew on his plane a bunch of times. But, he had a big bang in life, and we were a couple of international playboys. But I never was part of anything untoward like that. You know, I was dating centerfolds. I don't know who he was dating. He
Yeah.
should have said that. I mean, that was probably the highest ground.
Says, yeah, he was on the plane all the time. We always saw him. It's this thing of Trump just can't take any little nick in the armor. Look, his supporters are anxious for this to go away and have an explanation. If he said, and that's if this is true, but if he said, as you just said, yeah, I was on the plane, hung out, we were friends. Look, I've had friends that I've hung around and didn't know what they were up to and felt especially foolish. Bruce Ritter was a friend of mine, the priest who started Covenant House, helped tens of thousands of young people. When it was first reported by Charlie Sennett in the New York Post that Bruce was having sex with some of the kids, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I absolutely couldn't believe it. And Jerry Nachman, who was publisher of the New York Post that broke the story, called me because we were old friends and said, actually, Jerry was just pissed at me. Said, how can you do this? Do you think I would let a story go on in the paper that wasn't true? And just went absolutely nuts on me. But then he had Charlie call me. And Charlie went, yeah, Gil, I had the same feeling when I started working on this story. I didn't want it to be true. I didn't know anything. It was a supporter of Bruce Ritter, as everybody was, for all of the good side of him. But yeah, Gil, it's true. And so I think, you know,
But what you described, Gil Gross, is something different. You didn't know. But what Trump, I think, and this is probably the reality, to give him the benefit of any doubt, he averted his gaze. He
Absolutely
knew what was going on, but he averted his gaze.
Yeah, and that may be true because we don't know what names are in this. That may be true of all of these people. Another problem Trump has, because he came down with such a hard denial of it, was the birthday book. The comment in the birthday book about, you know, us keeping secrets, Jeffrey. Trump has completely denied that. But the lawyer, Edwards, was the lawyer for a couple of hundred young women who filed a suit against the Epstein estate, he says, oh yeah, that book absolutely exists. It's right now in the hands of the Epstein estate in Florida. You know, it could be subpoenaed, but that book absolutely exists, and Trump's greeting is absolutely in there despite his denials.
And I have to say, that verbiage, keeping a secret, that flies in the face of all of these kinds of explanations for, well, he was there, but he didn't know about anything. He looked the other way.
Yeah.
Sounds like it was more than he looked the other way. Again, based on what we know, and we're having to put together the little pieces of the puzzle. I will say this because, you know, Jeffrey Epstein ran an international human trafficking organization. And a few days ago, Ron Wyden, who's the senator from Oregon, right? Yeah. Said that his investigators, now he's on the committee, the finance committee, and he's the ranking Democrat on the finance committee. So when he says he's discovered something, it comes from that place on high. He said that his investigators had discovered that 4 big banks had flagged to the Treasury Department $1.5 billion in potentially suspicious money transfers involving Jeffrey Epstein. Much of that appeared to be related to his massive sex trafficking network. This is a revelation, and I'll just say that a lot of these banks and the trail of money extend back to Russia, extend back to some of these countries from which we know these women were trafficked. And this is, he's saying, evidence that the DOJ is ignoring evidence found in the U.S. Treasury Department's Epstein file. There is more, he says. This binder contains extensive details on the mountains of cash Epstein received from prominent businessmen that Epstein used to finance his criminal network. So the Treasury Department has this information because that's where these bank files exist. They have a suspicious activity report. Is it SARS? Suspicious activity reports. And he's saying, and there's a huge demonstrable trail that leads back to Jeffrey Epstein and a lot of these banks. So if you really wanted to pursue this, You could. It's all there in that Justice Department file, but he's saying the DOJ is looking the other way on it.
Yeah, and probably, look, it's not the first time that law enforcement has looked the other way. Remember, Epstein originally gets prosecuted and makes a deal with Florida where all the child sex trafficking charges are dropped against him despite the massive evidence, and he gets, what was it, 18 months, 13
Yeah,
months?
that Alex Acosta deal. Exactly.
Yeah. And basically gets a slap on the wrist. Now, Jeffrey, you be careful when you have sex with those children. And nothing. Then the DOJ takes it much more seriously, brings much more serious charges, puts together this file that we're all talking about. But then next thing we know, he's dead. And, more than likely suicide. There's questions about it, but so far no evidence it was anything but.
Well, there's no evidence, Gil, because all the video's gone and all the witnesses are gone. And I don't know. You and I could, go around about that another time. But definitely, you're right. I mean, the trail, it goes cold because he's not around anymore.
It goes cold at that point, and that file gets put in a drawer. That file gets put in the same place where most of the stuff at the end of the first Indiana Jones movie is put.
Right. There is Jeffrey Epstein over the shoulder of that beautiful woman that Trump is with. This Epstein thing, it's not going away, is it, Gil Gross? I mean, they can keep trying to serve up a new story or and play the old hits, Clinton, Obama. They can regurgitate whatever information they have from the Russians. But the reality is this Epstein story seems to have a half-life that's pretty sticky.
They sold it to MAGA, especially to Q, for years and years and years and years. You cannot sell something for years and years and years and years and suddenly try to make it go away. It's like pretending Donna Reed was the actress who played the wife on Dallas, or that Patrick Duffy, died and then was found in the shower a year later, and pretend that that didn't happen. We know it happened, and you can't unsell something that you sold for years and then just suddenly, have Patrick Duffy show up in the shower. It doesn't work, and nobody believes it. But this is a real thing. There are real lives involved. Real young women were assaulted, and this is a real story, and they sold it to their crowd, and their crowd is not letting go of this story. Now, does the MAGA crowd expect, Trump to be found guilty in here? Or are they still hoping that, oh, well, there we go. There's Bill Clinton, and then there's all these other Democrats, and that's what we're going to find? Yeah, probably. But we know Trump is in those files. We have the report from the Wall Street Journal. One of the reasons why Trump is now suing them for $10 billion.
Well, but just on that, though, Gil, he did maintain, look, I don't know what's going on with that report, and that's Pam Bondi's thing. Meantime, he had already been briefed in May on the report.
Yes.
The fact that his name shows up.
Yeah, and anybody who believes that Pam Bondi is doing anything without checking with President Trump first, raise your hand. Yeah, I don't see any hands.
Right. Yeah, I mean, she is a functionary. Look, he's surrounded himself with the Pam Bondis of the world. I mean, he's got a government that is expressing complete fealty. And where the shoe pinches for him, and then I'll let you go, is that a lot of these people were involved in the jihad to transparently reveal all the Democrats who are going to be in that Epstein file. Now I'm talking about Kash Patel, and I'm talking about Bongino, and so we know about this, and so these guys have an awkward walk back.
They have a very awkward walk back, and plus they can't walk back anything without Trump's permission and say so. And look, whatever you think of Donald Trump, politically, whatever you think of his political smarts or anything else, one of the problems is that Trump throws out word salads. I have a friend who used to work for a program director in Los Angeles who used to just throw out a million things at meetings, and they would try and do them. And finally, the assistant program director, who was an old friend of his, said, don't ever do anything when he says something once. If he says it like 6 times over 2 weeks, then he really means it, and you do that. But a lot of this is word salad. A lot of this is just his feelings at the moment. for God's sakes, don't do anything because he says, do this. And part of the problem is Kash Patel and Bongino and Pam Bondi and all of these people are going to hear Trump say something, and when he doesn't even know what he's saying, and try and act on it, and then very possibly look incredibly foolish the next day. And that's going to be a really real problem for them trying to get out of this mess.
Trump in the first administration seemed to have people who understood what your assistant program director in your story understood, which is that, don't take Trump seriously on a lot of stuff. He doesn't really even focus on a lot of stuff. But now you have people who are surrounding Trump and populating this administration who do jump at his first utterance,
He learned his lesson from the first administration when he had actual grown-ups like H.L. McMaster's around of him. None of them lasted 4 years, but he had actual grown-ups with actual knowledge who would go, yeah, I think it's a good idea, and do things. And his lesson from that is, I want people who, when I say jump, ask how high. And that's all he wants. And that is what he's got now. It's interesting. I've covered Trump since the 70s because I was originally, a New York street reporter and anchor, and we covered Trump, and we looked at him amusedly, and sometimes he would do good things. He saved the woman's skating rink, hooray, you have to name it after him.
He was dining out on the woman's skating rink savior for a long time, wasn't he, Gil?
Oh, yeah, but he was also throwing little old ladies out of buildings that he bought in Central Park South.
Sure.
He was making deals with the mob in Atlantic City, which, by the way, everybody who had a casino in Atlantic City made deals with the mob. You had to do that. So, when people talked about him as president, remember, he was a liberal Democrat then. People who say, oh, reporters have always hated Trump because he's conservative. He wasn't. The Clintons went to his wedding with Melania.
Well, this whole anti-gay thing and that's not Trump. Trump is a New York City guy. He's cool with gays. He was a friend of Elton John's, went to his party and all, he was a celebrity. I mean, basically, he was a kid born with a silver spoon in his mouth, right? And he just showed up at among the glitterati of New York, always wanting to be legit and never really viewed as legit. You know this better than I do, but that was my understanding of it.
Yes. I'll give you, well, let's talk about talk show hosts very briefly, and then you can let me go off into the night. But
I love it. Please, I need a name drop of some kind because you knew everybody, Gil Gross. Go ahead.
Our good friend who we both knew, Gene Burns, who's a terrific friend. We were talking about Savage and the act he was doing on the radio and the committed right-wing things he was doing. And Gene said, I'll tell you something about him. He said, he asked me when he started out, he said, where do you think there's more money, being a liberal or being a conservative on the radio? And Gene said, who was a libertarian himself, Gene said, no, you have to be real. You just have to be whatever you want. And apparently got to look like, that's not what that's not an answer I'm looking for. And in that same way, Trump found that there was no way through for him on the liberal Democratic side, which he had given tons of money to and supported for years, and went right. I think he believes most of it now, but mostly what he believes is what's good for me.
Sure.
And yeah,
he's
I think
not, you don't think he doesn't. I don't mean to focus on the gay thing, but the gay thing to me, the whole anti-gay LGBTQ plus jihad that the Republicans have now become associated with, I feel like that wasn't originally Trump. That's really not. And I don't think he cares because it's not about him and power and money and getting girls, which is really, those are the three things he cares about. But I just think that that's not in his DNA. I mean,
and being with celebrities, whether it was Elton John or
right.
Michael Jackson, he was always bragging about what good friends they were and all of that. No, it wasn't. He never took any of this stuff with that kind of seriousness. And in terms of having a grown-up around, Trump had a woman, and I'll give him credit on this. He had a woman who was his head of engineering. Very, very bright, and he hired her and gave her power at a time that no other New York City builder had. But she told me that all the time I would fire somebody because they were completely incompetent. And then they'd go crying to Donald, and Donald would go, oh, no, that's terrible. No, you shouldn't be fired, and rehire them. And she said, I have to go back and fire them again because, a building could fall down. It's just good to have these people there. So he used to have grown-ups around him who would protect him. And he doesn't have that anymore.
The one thing I would say about your narrative with Trump is it leaves out one huge thing, and that is the way his image was reconstituted by The Apprentice. The Mark Burnett show really shaped a different kind of Trump as a successful businessman, and you know this from having covered him in the 70s and through the decades. You know that he wasn't really a successful businessman, and he wasn't viewed as a successful businessman. He wasn't even viewed as a legit billionaire. But the slow motion walk from the helicopter and from the Trump plane and the music swells and just the way they choreographed that show was so beautifully done that it created an image, and he was able to take that image and ride it all the way to the presidency.
His one big success in New York was converting the old Commodore Hotel, which was old and run down at the time, into the Hyatt. And that was a big thing to him because his dad had done all of his work in Brooklyn and Queens. His dad never got to build anything in Manhattan. And to Donald, that was a big thing of showing dad, you see, me too. I play too. But it's more than The Apprentice. And by the way, since Mark Burnett's been mentioned, we should point out Mark Burnett is a steadfast Democrat, has given tons of money to the Democratic Party. And at the time The Apprentice began, Trump was a liberal Democrat. It goes back a little further than that. I'll make this really brief. Trump is in New York. If Trump is a builder, a Playboy builder in Kansas City, nobody cares. He's the same guy. Nobody cares. He's in New York. He's a character. He invites his girlfriend to the same skiing vacation as his wife. He's good copy. It starts with the New York Post, which makes headlines like Marla Maple saying best sex I ever had. He makes headlines in the New York Post as a tabloid, gets picked up then by Howard Stern because, again, not a political thing. Howard just likes people, especially have stories about women.
He's a good guest. Trump was always a good guest.
He was a good guest. So after the New York Post headlines, Howard has him on. That starts to give him a national exposure. So by time you get to The Apprentice and Burnett picks him, it wasn't because of politics. It was, and that was all scripted. And Burnett would be the first person to tell you that. It was even the "you're fired" line. It was this character that existed because he's in a major media center being a character. Again, if he's a character in Kansas City, we've never heard of him.
Sure. It's funny. My friend at the time, good friend, came up together. He's a programming executive producer, and he ended up running NBC. And he bought The Apprentice. And he told me some years later, not maybe 7 or 8 years later, during the success of Apprentice, he said, I didn't buy The Apprentice for Donald Trump. He said, I thought Donald Trump was a mess. I bought it for Mark Burnett. I knew that Mark Burnett would make that show work with him. And sure enough, it was a sleek offering. And I'm so glad you kind of filled in the bricks in the wall that led to that, because there was a lot leading up. And you're right. I forget about what a celebrity he was and the Stern stuff and the way that the tabs loved him. He was just great celebrity fodder,
Yeah, exactly. By the time, and again, NBC picks up The Apprentice because of Mark Burnett, but also it was cheap.
Right.
It was all done on the streets of New York, where NBC had studios, had crews. It cost nothing. It wasn't even expensive to the extent of Survivor, which is a very successful Mark Burnett show, where they have to go to Fiji, and for years they were going to different places around the globe. And then there was like tons of editing because they had all of these separate people with camera crews and producers following them. And for a reality show, not a cheap show.
Such a good point.
The Apprentice was an incredibly cheap show. One set, The Office, and then some remote stuff in a city where you had camera crews to spare. And that was another selling point.
Such a good point. Well, I like that we visited all these things, and I really love that we revisited the way we ended up here with Trump being who he is. Gil, please don't make it so long between visits. You know how I feel about you, and Kim feels similarly, so I hope you'll be back soon.
How I feel about you guys. Thank you. And prayers and good feelings to Kim and her mom.
Indeed. Gil Gross, everybody. So
Hi,
long,
it's
Gil.
Mark, and I thought that was great.
Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.